This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Sustainable Green Printing Partnerships webinar on the solid waste audit certification criteria. This is our deep dive session for this element, and we're very excited to have great speakers here with us today. My name is Marcy Kinter, and I serve as the chair for the SGP Technical Committee. And the Technical Committee is bringing to you these deep dive webinars on these new certification criteria elements as a way for you to understand all that you need to do and also to get your questions answered as to what do these elements mean. So I'd like to introduce to you Paul Bernay with Brand Key Graphics. Paul is one of our SGP patrons and brand leaders, and he is also serves on the SGP Technical Committee. Paul.
Yes. Hi, Marcy. Thank you for the introduction. We're going to go through about a dozen slides and with some information, and then I'm going to partway through hand this off to Wendy Nadine, the SGP lead auditor, and she will provide a bevy of information and detail on the solid waste audit. Oops. So the big picture, the environmental impacts fall into the following categories. So we talk about air emissions, and this is everything related to ozone depleting substances and the items above there. It gets into garbage or what's disposed of on land. We get into the water bodies and the discharge into those. So you can think of treatment plants, things that get caught up in the stormwater, etc. And then the use of our natural resources. So this can be renewable and non-renewable. So what's used for energy, what's used for making products. And then the impacts of solid waste. So land disposal, with trash and garbage, the emissions into the air. So, incinerating trash creates CO2. Landfill gases, everybody's aware and heard of methane. So that poses issues there. And then the emissions from the vehicles that are transporting the waste. Natural resource usage, so regarding forests, fossil fuels, for example, oil that's in plastics, and then the energy use, so fossil fuels that go into the energy, and that can regard manufacturing and transportation. So moving forward, a couple things to remember. So the SGP has always had a focus on recycling. So that's been in there for since day one. And then the SGP metrics have always asked facilities to measure your recycling activities. And then next, we're going to go into the solid waste audit, and it takes the certification criteria to the next step. So I'll be handing it over to Wendy Nadine, the lead SGP auditor, and she will go into much more detail. Wendy?
Thank you, Paul. And welcome. I see there's a few more people that have joined us. Congratulations. It wasn't easy to get on this webinar today. So the first step in a solid waste audit is to identify everywhere in your facility where solid waste is generated. So what does that really mean? That means you have to walk around your facility, poke around, look in each department, and figure out where the waste comes from. So generally speaking, there are several places to look. So there is packaging waste. So for the incoming raw materials, look and see what they're contained in. Are they in boxes, drums, bottles? Are they on a roll that has a core? Are they wrapped in shrink wrap? Does the facility use materials that are in cans, aerosols? even plastic strapping, metal strapping, bags, everything. So look at every single piece of material that's used to package incoming materials, because that ends up as waste. The next category is production waste. So look at your particular production technology, and obviously that's going to vary depending on what particular products you're manufacturing in your facility. But typically production waste will include some kind of substrate. So if there is trim, if there is make-ready waste, printing plates, if you're traditional technology printing. If you're litho, there will be blankets on the press, potentially wipers that are used to clean equipment. And don't forget any personal protective equipment that your employees use, because that's disposable and that ends up as waste generally in the garbage. Those are the two obvious ones, but then some of the less obvious places to look to identify solid waste are in maintenance activities, because maintenance do regular tasks. So replacing filters, replacing parts, batteries, light bulbs, these kinds of materials also are infrequent sources of solid waste. And then the office, although traditionally we don't think of the office as a major source of solid waste, things to focus on there, which often get overlooked, are things like cartridges for the photocopier and the desktop printers. What do you do with those cartridges? Are you able to take them back, and what happens to them? Obviously, there's paper in the office unless you've managed to go completely paperless, electronics at end of life, food waste, and if you have disposable cups and cutlery available in your lunchroom. So that is the first step to reducing your solid waste, is to come up with a comprehensive list of every item of solid waste that you generate. And while you're doing that, look and identify what you actually do with each of those items. Do you have them in a recycling stream? Do they go in garbage? Note what your current handling process is. So the next stage, the hierarchy for solid waste, has always been, is the reduce, reuse, recycle hierarchy. So if we can, thank you, Paul. I think, again, traditionally we jump to the recycle option, thinking that, hey, aren't we doing great? We segregate all our solid waste and we send it off-site for recycling. But it has a far greater impact if, as a facility, you can reduce the amount of solid waste that you generate. If some of it you can reuse, and then whatever is left, the third choice should be to recycle. So just to emphasize that hierarchy in front of mind when you're completing this solid waste audit. Because solid waste represents lost resources and lost money to your business. These are materials that you've paid for. Even if it's packaging, you've paid your supplier for these materials, and that includes the packaging. And if it is your actual substrate and the materials that go into production, you've paid for that stuff. So the less of it that ends up as waste, the better it is for the bottom line of your business. So how can what do you do to look and see if waste can be reduced? So again, looking at the two categories of waste, is the packaging excessive or inappropriate for your incoming raw materials? And this ties in with another criteria element, which is conversations with suppliers. So if, for example, you're having lots of plastic fill in boxes, that is going to end up as garbage, I can guarantee it. You can have a conversation with your supplier and say, hey, we don't want that in our box fill. We'd rather have a paper-based box fill because we can recycle that. As Paul had mentioned, there have been various elements of solid waste reduction initiatives in the previous versions of the certification criteria. And one of those was the written procedure to minimize make ready and run waste. So that is still included in your solid waste audit, that's one of the methods that you use to reduce your solid waste. So having looked to see, other opportunities to reduce your solid waste, now figure out, can we actually reuse some of this stuff? So you're already doing a lot of that reuse, skids, pallets, whatever term you use, cores, boxes, and tubes typically quite often do get reused for finished product. Some facilities are able to reuse substrate for equipment make ready, and totes and drums can often be sent back to suppliers for reuse and refilling. So that's, those are typical examples of reuse. And finally, once you've got past the reduction and the reuse opportunities, then look and see what can be recycled. So paper streams, they're always pretty easy. There is established infrastructure in North America to recycle paper streams. Plastic streams, I think, as we all know, can be pretty challenging at the moment, but there are opportunities to do that. Metal streams, again, usually metal is worth money, so that isn't usually terribly challenging to find vendors that want to take your metals. And there are programs, depending on who your manufacturer is, for toner and printer cartridges. Some facilities are very good at doing that, and other facilities, it hasn't yet hit their radar screen. So I've included that there for those of you that haven't yet investigated that opportunity. So what are the approaches and challenges you can use in your solid waste audit? Again, remember that the goal here is to reduce the generation of solid waste. So how are you going to do that? So if it's a packaging issue, then you'll need to work with your suppliers on that. So some of the things that you can do, and I still see this, polystyrene peanuts coming in as fill-in boxes, and those air pouches are very commonly used to fill boxes as well. I don't think there's any reason anybody needs to use either of those materials anymore. There are systems that use scrunched up paper or just reuse paper to put in boxes to fill it. So that's a pretty easy win if you have that kind of issue in your facility. Tying in with another criteria element again, you can work with your customers to look at the product design to see if there are opportunities to make that final product recyclable. And as we all know, if you have mixed plastics in a product, there's no technology at the moment to separate those plastics, so they're not recyclable, they're going in the garbage. So if there is an opportunity to modify that final product in some way to use a single plastic, then it can at least give the option to keep it out of landfill or energy recovery or however garbage is handled in your particular location. If you're stuck for how to handle materials that are potentially recyclable but you can't find a vendor, try networking with local businesses. I do see going into different locations, occasionally some facilities find people that will take some of these materials, whereas the exact same material in other facilities, they're chucking it in the garbage. So I have seen some facilities that by scraping out metal ink cans, for example, they've been able to find a scrap metal dealer that will take that material. And plastic chemical containers, if they're rinsed out, again, there are some companies that will take them back provided that they're uncontaminated. But I always recommend chat with your local businesses because there is a lot of local knowledge and you might be able to find a solution to your problem with other local people. Going back to the toner and ink cartridge issue, talk to the original equipment manufacturers. Some of those will take back the containers. On their website, sometimes you can just go and print a return label. So if you collect them up, you can ship them back and they will remanufacture and reuse them. Sometimes also there are local vendors that will take them back and they will either remanufacture them or they will break them apart and recover the raw materials. I know here I can take mine back to Staples, for example. Any ink cartridges that they sell, can take them back to Staples and they will recycle them. And if you're trying to reduce how much garbage that you make, right-sizing your waste containers will sometimes encourage employees to find the right container for the solid waste. So if you have a massive, great big garbage bin, people are going to put stuff in it. If you have a small garbage bin and if you have large recycling bins, that encourages people to recycle. If you've already optimized your segregation, obviously that's not going to help you. But sometimes it can help you get to that point if you're having problems setting up your program. Okay, what I'm going to do now is go through the templates that you can find on the impact tracker in the solid waste audit section if you have the version 4 annual report created for your particular facility. So the templates, I will emphasize, are optional. You don't have to use them. If you have something that's functionally equivalent, you are more than welcome to use that as well. And you can also edit them to fit your particular facility needs. So I've put some screenshots up here. I realize that you can't really read this and there's a lot of wording here, so I just want to talk you through it in general terms so that if you're interested, you can actually look at the Excel file and then you can dig into it a little bit deeper. So there are various tabs on this Excel file, and the first one is the instructions tab. And I know if you're like me, quite often you skip over the instructions tab because you figure you know how to do it. But it does spell out here the process that is intended to be used for this particular template. The next tab is for the first step that I documented, which is to go around and figure out where you generate your waste in each department. So there is a tab for each department, and they're generic. So there's one for pre-press, one for press, one for bindery. Again, if you don't have all of those particular departments, you can delete. If you have another department or you use a different name, you can add and you can revise or do what you need to do to make this fit your facility. So there is pre-populated here a brainstormed list of all the possible materials that you could have. Again, if you don't have them, you can just delete them. If there's some that you have that aren't on here, you can add them. The next step then is to capture of the materials, what do you already recycle? So the list of the materials, and here you can capture the vendor name and the vendor contact information. Quite often when I go to facilities, they know that maybe they recycle paper and cardboard, but sometimes they're not sure who the contractor is that comes and picks it all up. So this is a central way where you can capture all of that information and which particular materials go into which particular stream, because sometimes there are mixed recycling streams as well. So if you do have mixed recycling streams, then you can capture that information on this particular sheet. The final stage, once you've captured all the information in your facility, is to do a compliance check. So that basically means sticking your head in garbage containers and in the recycling bins to look and see what's in there. I don't mean you have to tip it out and do a garbage dive, which is can be nasty, but just have a look. And as you're walking around collecting information, then just look in each of the bins and you can pretty quickly see, are people chucking their coffee cups into the waste paper bin? Are you seeing shrink wrap in with the cardboard stream? And this will give you a good idea of how good your source separation processes are at the facility. So if all of your containers are clean and uncontaminated, your folks are doing a great job. If you're seeing contamination in those bins, then it means you've got an education challenge that you need to go back and take a look at why aren't people putting them in the right bins. The final tab is to then, having collected all the information, is figure out what opportunities there are to reduce your waste. And there can be any number of things depending on what your process is here. It could be that you've gone back to your supplier and you have convinced them not to use polystyrene roll wedges, for example, which I've seen in some facilities. So whatever opportunities you identify, capture them on this tab. And then the final tab that's there, again, this is for you when you assign these opportunities or potential opportunities to assign responsibility and a date, so you can follow up to see that these activities have been completed. So just a very quick rundown of the template and the structure of it. I would encourage you, if you haven't done a solid waste audit yet and you think you'd like to use the template, to download it and have a look so that you can get a better feel for how it's laid out. So that's my little spiel on the SGP template and the drivers for it. So we'd like to open it up now for any questions related to anything solid waste.
And just to note to everyone too, that this is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to see all the information, and that will also be on the SGP website under the resources.
Yes, so hi Wendy, this is Marcy again. We have a question about where can they download the template?
So that's a very good question, because the solid waste audit is a requirement for the version 4 criteria. So this didn't exist in the 2016 version 3. So on the tracker, if you still have either a initial certification report or an annual report in version 3, you won't see it there because it isn't in that format. If you want to get it, if you go into the tracker on the internal verification tab, and if now you create a new annual report, that will be to version 4, and you can open it up and there will be a solid waste audit in there and you can download it there. That doesn't obligate you to complete an annual report in version 4 if you're still in version 3, because I went and created version 3 annual reports for all existing facilities until the phase-in date for the version 4 criteria, which is January 1st, 2024.
Right, so I will say that the template that we have developed for the tracker is considered an SGP resource. So we really hope that those of you that are going through certification or recertification do take time to look at your tracker and to go back and take a look at the program that we ran a few weeks ago on tips and tricks for using the SGP Impact Tracker. Are there any other questions that we have from the audience? And thank you again for your persistence in coming to sign up.
Sometimes in my experience, when I'm on webinars and somebody talks through something like this, it looks, oh, that looks pretty easy. I've got the hang of that. And sometimes the questions arise when you actually use the tool and start to collect your own information and figure out what to do with it. So if after this webinar you have any questions about this solid waste audit, I can always be used as a resource going forward. So feel free to email me if you do have any questions in the future when the rubber hits the road and you're actually trying to complete this exercise.
Okay, we do have a question again. It's how extensive should the audit be? What they're talking about is, does every waste stream need to be identified, or would identifying the larger waste streams be sufficient?
So once you've got a handle on your larger waste streams, then the gains are to be made in the little odds and ends. But sometimes it's surprising what goes in the garbage. And it's always with audits that the effort you put in should be proportionate to the results you're going to get from it. So as you get a handle on the larger items and you're squeezing down to the last 5, 4, 3, 2, 1% of the potential improvements, then it takes greater and greater effort to do that. So that's really a judgment call. It's up to you. It should be a reasonable look in depth to understand where all of your waste is coming from, what the potential is, and opportunities to improve. First, the reducing, then the reusing, and then the recycling. So if you think you've optimized all of those things, then that would be adequate. It's going to be a judgment call.
Okay, great. And someone indicated to me that they didn't see solid waste on the impact tracker for version 4, and it is under waste audit. So if you're looking at your tracker and you're on version 4, if you look under energy audit, there'll be a tab for waste audit. And when you open that up, you will see the guidance, you will see the requirement for the written procedure to minimize make-ready and production waste, and then you will also see the recommended template for the waste audit. Oh, he found it, excellent. So it is up there, but that's a really good point, and I think we will need to maybe rename this solid waste audit or solid waste next time we have a revision to the tracker. Any other questions? Okay, that's all for the questions, Paul. If we can, I guess, wrap it up.
Yeah, just like to encourage everyone for the next session, which is called Management of Change. That'll be June 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So please sign up. Back to you, Marcy.
Great, thank you. And I will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone with the correct registration link, as I checked that while we were having our program. And I encourage everyone to chime in when Wendy will be going over the management of change procedure and requirements, as this is a new element within the SGP certification criteria. And with that, our program is over for today. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Wendy can be reached at wendy@nadan, N-A-D-A-N, consulting.com. And you can also send an email to sgpprogram@sgppartnership.org. Thank you all and have a great day.